All right, folks. So none of you asked for it, but I'm gonna give it to you anyway. This is the Generator deck profile I've been working on for quite some time. There's some slight additions with the new support for the giant castle one looking one. I'm not gonna pronounce his name till I get to it, but there's some new support. Gives us more disruption options, and it's a really solid deck. It takes a lot of skill to pilot because you are very limited on negations, but if you can know your matchups, you can really do well with it. I've been kind of killing out my locals, thank God. And yeah, I really like this deck. It's a lot of fun, so let's get into it. Starting off with one copy of Mardell, the Generator Boss of Light. I had this at 2 with the last build, but if you play Pokemon, you know about 4-slot syndrome. The problem is that this deck in the future has a lot more support coming in bigger boss monsters, but there's not enough room in the deck to accommodate them all because there's a lot of fluff you have to play in the spell and traps. So the one thing you could sacrifice is Mardell for sure. One of is fine. Just use it to search your boss stage or any of your other generate cards. Usually you search boss stage or boss fight. So you can start plussing, set up, and get everything you need. I'm sorry, boss quest, that's the one. But it's just your generic searcher, and it's your lone fire target. 2 copies of Nidhogg. Nidhogg is one of the better ones for sure. You have to pick and choose which one you want to summon, and Nidhogg usually ends up being your first if you don't know what you're playing against. So you can only control one of each generate monster as per all their effects. But when your opponent special summons a monster or monsters, as a quick effect, you contribute a generate monster or a worm monster and negate the summon, and then destroy that monster or monsters. So it's once per turn, but it's definitely a powerhouse of a card. You definitely want to start off with this one more than the others. Once you know your matchup, you go into game 2 and 3. You can go into your other options as you see fit, but this is definitely one of your best ones. 2 copies of Frodi. Frodi is a double-edged sword, no pun intended. You can tribute as a quick effect, generate monsters to destroy that many monsters your opponent controls, and then they draw a card for each one you destroy. So it's a big risk reward. This is the one that you don't want to bring out game 1 because if you don't know what you're playing against and you miss that choke point, your opponent's going to draw a bunch of cards off of it, and you're not going to be able to come back from that, even if you bring out Nidhogg later on that turn. So you definitely want to use this one sparingly. Make sure you're using it to get the maximum value to the point where you know your opponent's not going to be able to continue with the cards that they draw. But still a 2 of, very powerful. The new card, Utgarda. Sure, what a name. This is the 3rd piece of disruption in the new support for Ignition Assault. You can tribute to generate monsters or rock monsters and then target one card on the field and banish it. This is super important now because we don't have any back row removal, and this is pseudo back row removal. It gets rid of some floodgates that might be problematic, continuous spells or traps that are very detrimental to a strategy that you're playing against. So definitely one of the better cards for sure. It also has monster removal and it's non-targeting. It's non-destruction, so gets rid of things like Dingirsu and so on. Really amazing card. Always better at 2. 2 copies of Hela. Hela is your recursion monster, so you contribute a generate monster or a zombie monster, and special summon 1 generate monster from the graveyard in defense position. So when you go into your turn 3, turn 4, so on, this lets you recur the other boss monsters you brought up from the deck. Definitely one of the better cards, and I feel like running it at 1 is a bit of a mistake because you end up wanting to see it more often as the grind game goes further down, so I like 2. 1 copy of Dovulgus. This one is a little niche, but it helps those really bricky hands become playable. You contribute generate monsters or machine monsters on the field, and then special summon different generated monsters from your hand or machine monsters with different names of the tributed monsters. So if you draw a hand of nothing but generated monsters, you can bring this one out, tribute the ones of the tokens, and then bring out the boss monsters you have in your hand, which allows you to continue with the disruption. So really important to have at least one of so you can unbrick some hands. And then finally, the last generated boss we play is Naglfar. Its effect is very mediocre. It protects your generators or beast warriors from being destroyed by tributing a generated monster, but We only run it because it's a 3100 beat stick, gets over a lot of big monsters in the meta, and helps you out with those circumstances. The effect to protect is negligible, honestly, because in most situations, they're nuking your entire board anyway. But you still have to run it just for that really big beat stick. Last of the monsters, 2 low Fire Blossom. We don't have any normal summons in the deck, so this is a great one to get your play started, and you bring out Mardell. Onto the spells. 3 copies of Generator Boss Stage. This is your main card of the deck. So once per turn, if your opponent adds cards from the main deck to their hands, except during the damage step, you special summon 1 Generator monster from your deck in defense position. So that helps you bring out your boss monsters real easy. The second effect is if you special summon a Generate monster, during your opponent's turn, you special summon tokens onto the field, as many as you can. They're all level 4, 1500 attack and defense. They have to be in attack mode, but this isn't a problem because you end up attributing them for costs anyway. This is your main fuel. This helps you eat the resources that the boss monsters require. And the tokens do get destroyed during the end phase, but again, you do away with them most of the time anyway. So they'll never get attacked. And unfortunately, you can't use them for link material without being cheeky, so don't try anything funny. But amazing card. 3 copies of Generator Boss Quest. This is one of your main stratos for the deck, essentially. You reveal a Generator monster in your hand, and then add 2 Generator spells or traps with different names from your deck to your hand, and then place that Generator monster on the bottom of your deck. This is your main way of searching your field spell, essentially more copies of Boss Stage, and this deck has a lot of ways to search Boss Stage. There's plenty of ways to do so, but this is the best one in the deck. You could search this with Mardell. If you have a Generator card in your hand that's breaky, you don't want it there. That's where this comes in. Mardell searches this. This lets you put back the Generator monster, and then you can get your Boss Stage and 1 other spell or trap card. So definitely must be at 3. 3 copies of World Legacy Monstrosity. This is your power play card. Helps you unbreak your hands by special summoning the level 9s from your hand, as well as setting up Calamities plays, other rank 9s, putting bodies on board for next turn. They are destroyed during the end phase, but if one of those cards, if you have leftover Naglfar, you can tribute him to protect the other 2 monsters that you summoned with this. So there are some synergies, but most of the time you use it to go into rank 9 plays, or just shotgun boss monsters out from the deck to use for multiple disruptions. Really good card. You could probably cut it to your liking depending on your deck build, but I feel 3 is still really good. 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. Extravagance is a must. I know we just got a budget option, quote unquote, with the level 9 discard card that came in Mission Assault, but honestly, discarding, yeah, you have synergy with Hela. You could discard one of your boss monsters and then, draw 2 cards and revive with Hela, but you really don't want to burn through your monsters that fast, even if you have it in your hand. And most of the time, you're going to get rid of that boss monster with Quest. So it's really not a good, valid argument. Extravagance just does so much more for the deck. It really helps you draw everything that you need and give you advantage, which we'll get to in a moment, why that's so important with one of the other main deck cards. Actually, we'll get to it right now. Super Polymerization. I'm running 3 currently because of my local scene. You have a choice to run Nibiru as well. This deck really struggles with big boards and boss monsters that can't be destroyed. So Super Poly is one of your main outs, and this is where Extravagance becomes important. The level 9 discard card, Kuji Curry, whatever the hell it's called, it requires you to discard for cost, which means you're just trading out cards and resources. Extravagance is a straight +1, and that +1 could be the difference of you having a card ready for Super Polymerization to discard. So you want to make sure you can maximize your resources and plus as much as possible. So Super Poly really is just that good for the deck. Really helps deal with those boss monsters. You're not summoning from the extra deck too often. And it's a blowout against those really hard matchups. 2 copies of Call by the Grave, because being ashed on your field spell sucks. The field spell is not a hard once per turn for the special summon from deck, so if they ash it, you can bring it back with another effect and then get another boss monster instead, but you really don't want that to be the case. So 2 Call by the Grave just to cover your bases, and use it offensively too on your opponent. You know, set it for turn 1, hold it for a super poly discard. You know, there's lots of ways you can use this card effectively. Onto the traps, 3 copies of Generaider Boss Fight. This is a metaverse for the deck. It allows you to activate the Generate Field spell directly from your deck or graveyard. So if you run out of them in the deck, you can cycle the ones in your graveyard, provided your opponent's not banishing them. The drawback is your opponent draws a card. It's negligible because you get, once you activate this and your new boss stage comes to the field, you get to special summon another boss monster because it's not a hard one to return on the summon from deck. So this card is mandatory 3 of. Again, you have multiple copies of Terraforming for your boss stage. You gotta have it. 1 copy of Generaider Boss Room. This is your anti-hand trap for the boss stage. It also helps with your other interactions, but basically if your opponent activates a card in response to any of your Generaider cards, you can discard a card, again, resource management with the extravagance, and then that effect that they responded with becomes each player draws a card. So you don't plus, but you're negating an effect essentially, a soft negate, and then you're reactivating your boss stage's effect if you manage to get another one onto the board. So just an overall good card, gives you resource management and prevents those really bad plays. So if they try to Ghost Ogre your field spell to blow it up, this activates, discard a card, Ghost Ogre becomes, we draw a card, you get to special summon from the deck, and you keep your field spell. So this is definitely a one of because you could search it. Wouldn't want to run more than that. Finally, for our handicap plays, 3 copies of There Can Only Be One. This is the best floodgate to run for the deck. Each of your monsters is a different attribute and type, so you have no restrictions whatsoever. The tokens are the only thing that you'll lose multiples of because they're all fairies and lights, but that's not a big deal because you contribute the other Generaider boss monsters for cost, and use our effects, tribute them off. You still have ways to use your cards, and they contribute themselves for cost, so not a problem there most of the time. It's really a good blowout card. It's still good for the meta. And finally, 3 Solemn Judgment. This card at 3 is super good. Again, we can't deal with back row hate, and we can't deal with back row itself, so you need something to supplement that to make sure you have an out to random situations that your monsters can't deal with normally. This is that out. Moving on to the extra deck. It's a little basic right now, but it works. Again, because we're running Super Poly, options are a little tight. But 3 copies of Jormungand, whatever the hell, big snake guy. He kind of sucks. He lets you quick effect detach a material, and then you and your opponent draw a card and attach a card from their hand or field to this card, and he gets 1,000 attack for each card attached to him. So he becomes 3,000 after the effect. This can facilitate your boss stage, but that doesn't happen too often. You mainly use it just to summon it, keep it on the board, then the second turn it's there, it becomes a 5,000 beat stick, or 4,000 or whatever, and it just helps you swing over things and close out games. It's not great, but you want to have at least 1 copy, and since we're running Extravagance, you got to run 3. 3 copies of Calamities, your offensive play. We all know how good this card is. Detach a material, declare a type, that type can't use their effects. It's a 3,000 beat stick with a 3,000 body. It's really good, and it lets you go offensive if you know your opponent's a very monster-heavy deck. So that turn 1 going first, use World Legacy Monstrosity after you bring out a Generaid, and then have this on board, call whatever, and your opponent can't play the game. So really good card, mandatory in any level 9 deck. Onto our Super Poly targets, Diplexer Chimera, Salamangreat, Violent Chimera, and Starving Venom. I know it seems a little extra to have Duplex Chimera and Salamangreat Violent Chimera because you would think it's for the same matchup, Salamangreat. But you see, in my local, someone's playing Mathmex, so I have to make sure I have an out to them trying to get to their boss monster, so that's why I'm running this. This is totally a meta call. You can switch it to another Super Poly target if you want, or if you're not playing Super Poly and you're running Nibiru, you can just get rid of these altogether and put some Link monsters or rank 9s of your choosing. But they're just targets for that reason. And then finally, a small package of Nightmare Phoenix, Masquerena, and Unicorn. Phoenix deals with back row that you can't deal with. IP Masquerena can be made in certain situations. You could, if you get 3 monsters on board, you could link them away for this, and then keep one generate monster. Your field spell activates, you get tokens, and then you can use your effect to link away into either Unicorn or Phoenix. Really good spot removal. If you don't run Super Poly, you can put bigger link monsters like Avramax, Borreload, Boral Sword, whatever the case may be. But right now, it's just a small package to deal with things that the deck normally can't deal with. Onto the side deck. Normally, I don't show side decks, but I feel this deck is so important to know your matchups and the meta to make it be successful that it's kind of mandatory to at least have an idea of what your side deck is going to be. The meta isn't evolved currently. We don't know what it's going to look like, but this is what I have for now, and I'll explain in a second. But first off, tokens. Gotta have tokens. All beautiful, pretty tokens. 3 copies of Nibiru. I know I'm main deck in the Super Poly, and I said you could switch it out for this, but if there's a matchup where it's just a big heavy monster combo deck, and you don't, Super Poly is not going to work on the end board, this is your out to that. So it's really good to have Nibiru for that reason alone. 3 copies of Lancia. I don't know if this is going to be as good, but if Hero's running around in circles and Orcus is still a thing, this hits both of them really hard. So figured it's a really nice card to have for those matchups. It doesn't really affect you too much. 3 copies of Draw and Lock. Your opponent getting massive advantage is something that you do naturally, so you want to make sure that you can stop them from drawing cards altogether. It has some synergies, which is really nice. But at the same time, you may lock yourself out from certain plays. But it's important not to let your opponent get too far ahead. And Spiral's a thing right now, apparently. So 3 Draw and Lock Bird is a must. And it really does stop your opponent from getting too much advantage going second against them. 3 copies of Twin Twisters. Again, back row hate is something this deck lacks currently. So we have to make sure we, go up on that. You're more than welcome to run Cosmic Cyclone instead. But if you're going second, Twin Twisters, you're drawing an extra card. You have Extravagance. You could afford the cost. And then finally, 3 copies of Evenly Matched. There's matchups like Guru and Alter Guys going around. Sky Striker if it's still a thing. So it's important to have blowout cards like this. It just helps you deal with the back row, the big heavy monster boards with no negates, so on and so forth. And to wrap it up, essentially, you'll notice all these cards, they have maximum impact. You want to be able to trade as much resources as possible. These cards have to be blowout. Your side deck really has to be blowout cards, because since your deck is running minimal negates, you can't afford to have Ash. Ash is a 1-for-1 trade. It's not good enough to let you keep up. Ghost Ogre is fine, but it hasn't been too good this meta. Effect Veiler, it's fine, but again, it doesn't trade enough resources. And same thing with Impermanence. Impermanence is great. Maybe you can take out Call by the Grave for Impermanence, but again, it's just a 1-for-1 trade. You want to make sure you have blowout cards to ensure that your deck can keep up and that you maximize the... you can minimize the amount of usages that your deck provides in the form of the boss monster. So that's my reason for these side decks. Again, the meta's going to change, so we'll see if that changes up, but I feel this is really good, and it's been what's been working for me so far, so I can't really complain. But that's the deck, guys. I hope you really enjoyed. It's a fun deck. It requires a lot of knowledge of the meta and certain decks because you have to work with what you got. And if you don't got the skill, this deck's not going to do jack for you. You're going to be giving your opponent cards. You're going to be falling behind. And, it's important to read up a little bit before you try this deck. But I recommend it highly. It's fun. It's interactive. It's grindy. And the art is amazing. I mean, boss monsters, come on. What can you say? So please leave a like, comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe. Thank you, and have a good one.